Good evening and welcome to Silicon Mountain. My name is Garrett McCullough and I will be the host tonight. Tonight we are going to be talking about hackathons and how they can improve the community. But first, we want to thank our great sponsors, and I'm going to hand it off to Ellen for that.
Thank you. We have 4 wonderful sponsors of the event this evening. If there are others who are interested in sponsoring future events, please talk to me afterwards and I'll get you in touch with Tim. I'm standing in for him this evening. So the first of the sponsors is Clear Capital, who's been a sponsor for this event for a long time. Clear Capital is the leading provider of real estate valuations, data, analytics, and technology solutions to mortgage lenders, services, and ratings agencies. We're also fortunate to have 2 of our sponsors here in person tonight. So I'd like to ask Robert to talk for a few minutes about New Leaders.
Hi, I'm Robert from New Leaders, and we're a software development firm based in Truckee. We build web and mobile applications to automate businesses, surpass investor expectations, and make great employees happy.
The third sponsor here with us this evening is Holland & Hart, and they've been sponsoring for several months now. Dick?
Hi, I'm with Holland & Hart. We are a general practice law firm. Our closest office is in Reno, but we're all over the Rocky Mountain West. I'm in the patents group, and I do patents, trademarks, and other kinds of intellectual property. But the firm will be glad to talk to you for most any kind of your legal needs.
And finally, the Truckee Chamber is a sponsor of the event, and you, by being members of Silicon Mountain, are virtual members of the Truckee Chamber. So the Truckee Chamber is the largest, most networked membership organization in Truckee, focused on economic, tourism, and community vitality. The Chamber supports Silicon Mountain as an innovative thought leadership organization, bringing new tech and ideas to Truckee. The Chamber also provides a monthly presentation called Good Morning Truckee. This month, the topic is High Times Coming to Truckee. So that's tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. over at the airport. This will be a packed event, so make sure that you're there early to learn about the future of marijuana in Truckee. And so those are our 4 sponsors for tonight's event. And again, please get in touch with me at the end of the meeting if you're interested in sponsoring future meetings.
Thank you, Ellen. Tonight, I am happy to introduce our speaker, Joe Chavez. Joe is the president of the STEAM initiative, and he is also the leader of the Reno NASA Space Apps Challenge, which is a hackathon that I participated in last year. It was a lot of fun, and I'm happy to have Joe as our speaker tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about why hackathons. So I had to ask myself this question about 4 or 5 months ago when I did a presentation at Hack for Reno. And so you're seeing what I would call the extended version of that presentation. They gave me 20 minutes in that presentation, which was really not conducive to talking about this topic, but I did it anyway. So a little bit, yes. Okay, so NASA started this thing called Space Apps Challenge 5 years ago. Reno became a city 4 years ago. On a whim, I decided to apply as the city of Reno, and they accepted, so I am the representative. My connection to NASA is through a project I worked on. For the most part of the 2000s, which was called the Spitzer Space Telescope, and that was one of NASA's 4 great observatories. Spitzer, Hubble, Compton, and Chandra were all space-based telescopes that NASA conceived missions for in the 70s. Spitzer actually launched in 2003, and I was on that project for 9 years and basically architected and built the ground system that allowed the observers to use the telescope. The Space Apps Challenge came about because NASA was trying to figure out what to do with their outreach program, because it wasn't really done that well at that point. And so they decided to say, let's open up NASA a little bit, which in NASA's terms, that meant we can't have a hackathon because that means that people are trying to hack NASA, so they called it a challenge. but for all intents and purposes, it is a hackathon. And then last year, I'd kind of been running this as a side thing. I decided to found the STEAM initiative as a nonprofit 501(c) to kind of put all this stuff in, and then do some of the things I'm going to talk about in this presentation in terms of keeping the momentum after the hackathon. So here's my brain on hackathons. Right, so we're going to take a spin around this wheel of nodes here. So don't worry, every slide will have a presence on that mind map. All right, so we can talk about the what. What is a hackathon? And I've kind of touched on the idea of what a hackathon is in terms of what NASA thinks it is, which they call it a challenge. But to me, it's like any place where, say, a company would say, you know, our people are kind of in a rut. We want to take them somewhere and they can drink all night and then work all day, right? So they kind of break them out of their environment. That's kind of, you know, an offsite or a camp. You say, okay, take people out of their environment, put them in some other place where they would, you know, kind of reassociate themselves with their work, with other people they may or may not know. Startup Weekend is another example. The Space Apps Challenge. Innovation Week. I was at a company that had this thing called Innovation Week, where people teamed up and sat in a room for a week and came up with ideas and tried to productize those ideas. A summit. Hack for Reno had something they called a summit last fall. And while it wasn't a traditional hackathon, it was about hacking their own hackathon because it got stale, right? So, and then the conference, right? Week long, go in there for deep dives on topics, you know. So it's kind of like, you know, you have interest and you're set in an environment that allows you to explore those interests. So that's kind of what I see a hackathon being, right? So the hackathons themselves have what I call a workflow, which is kind of like the process you go through to actually have one, right? So there's this idea of ramp up, which is all the months leading up to like 2 months before the hackathon, where you're kind of thinking about talking to people and people are thinking about talking to you, and you know, send out emails and kind of just, you know, casually coordinate things. And in the case of NASA's hackathon, they actually have a team that coordinates on the global level, because it is a global event. We'll talk about numbers a little bit later on, and you kind of see the scale of that. And then what I call a kickoff or a preview event, which we're having this Saturday at the UNR Planetarium, which is the idea of putting together some people who have kind of a pre-interest in either forming a team or something they want to work on, or just want to learn about the event. And this year we're combining with the Microsoft Hackathon, so we're going to have their people and our people all in the same place, and we're going to see how that works out. So, and you know, kind of like leading up to the hackathon and definitely the day of, the teams will self-organize. And so the organizer of the hackathon, if they've, you know, done their job, they just say, you have your teams, go to work, right? And so far I've been very lucky, because every team that's formed in one of my hack events is produced and done very well, so that's good. Then you go off and work, right? So typically, you know, the hackathon would be 24 to 48 hour period, continuous, you know, just people just basically dead at the end of 2 days or after, you know, 24 hours. And that's like, you know, the original programmer style hackathon. We tend to think of it as a little different. So it'll be interesting. So we typically split it over 2 days and go anywhere from 18 to 20 hours over those 2 days, just depending on how it works out. And kind of gives everybody, you know, time to come in, work a solid day, and do, you know, set up a plan for the next day, and then kind of wrap things up and then have something that they can demonstrate. And that's where the checkpoints comes in. So I go around to the teams and say, so how's it going? What do you need? You know, what has to happen in order for you to get to a place where you can demo your results or your product or whatever at the end of the hackathon. And wrap up, show your work is kind of like, you know, so they kind of all kind of go this way. And where traditionally it's been more like a company would say, let's get all our engineers together and just make them work on this new thing or something we think is interesting. The hackathon in this sense is more of like, let's kind of an environment. I'll take the mic. And so, constrained within a structure of challenges that they pose. The first year there were 50 challenges, which is pretty overwhelming, and they only published them a week before the actual event, which gave you almost no time to think about it. This year there's 16, 17-ish, and they gave them to us a month before. So everybody learns as you go through this workflow what works and what doesn't work. They still need to fix their registration system though. All right, so who goes to hackathons? Well, so developers, right? If the hackathon is for people to code at, then you need people that know how to write code. So, in a traditional sense of a hackathon, that's what you had. You had coders, you had some hardware people, maybe, kind of all engineer types. In this kind of modern era of hackathons, as I'll call it, we have designers, we have hardware engineers, we have people that organize other people, we have project managers, volunteers, right? Sponsors come in, and sometimes they have an interest in what's being produced, as in they're sponsoring some, particular aspect of the hackathon. And observers, and along that lines, observers who you want to talk to, and the media, who are observers you don't necessarily want to interact with because you're trying to actually get some stuff done. Not that I hate the media, don't get me wrong. So you can get a mix of people. At the core, there's a functioning team of engineer types and people who understand engineers and how to organize them, and it's somebody with an idea that wants to get something done, and they elaborate and organize and so on and so forth. So. All right, so the idea of expectations is that if I'm a sponsor of a hackathon, I might say, well, this is a healthcare hackathon. I need these people to build me an app, and it should be ready by the end of the weekend, right? That's not reality. The people who attend hackathons typically will say, hey, you're going to feed me, and you're going to give me stuff, and I'm going to sit here and work and be very, very happy. Might be worn out at the end, but I'll feel like, I was taken care of. The sponsors, as I mentioned, sometimes they're looking for some sort of ROI that may be a direct result of the events of the hackathon or the work that was done. However, that's not really the purpose as I see it, which I'll dive into a little bit later. You welcome people to come and say, hey, there's probably a good talent pool of engineers at this hackathon. Maybe I should go in and talk to them. But I generally say, yeah, if somebody wants to talk to you, sure. If you go and actively try to recruit people, then you'll basically show you the door. So, and then I look at it as a networking opportunity for all the other people that are attending and organizing and whatnot. So, fame and fortune. In hackathons, typically there is some sort of prize system that the participants get to, be involved in. In the case of, like a corporate sponsored hackathon, typically there's some cash involved. In other places, it's just about, getting the press cycles or having your app published or so on and so forth. So there's different ways of coming out of a hackathon. And I would say if your goal is to make money, you're probably not in the right place unless you come up with a really good idea that you could implement and build upon post-hackathon. And the NASA hackathon's all done for the fame. So
just to add, if I can, I actually participated in the Startup Weekend Tahoe that we had here a couple of years ago, and to my knowledge, I don't think any of the only maybe one or two of the companies continued work after after the Startup Weekend. However, there were a number of people who that allowed them to sort of crystallize their ideas and gave them skills. And I think Ellen might even say that she was one of those people that the Startup Weekend helped her with her startup that she went on to found, although it wasn't a direct growth out of that weekend.
yeah, I've also been at Startup Weekend, and I think the number is like 3 out of 100. Actually, there's the nexus of an idea that continues on in that sense. but it's a fun weekend, and don't get me wrong. All right, so why have a hackathon? So for me, it's a learning opportunity. As I kind of mentioned earlier, you have an opportunity as an individual to go and say, I don't know what's going to happen this weekend, but let me just sit down with a group of people, and maybe I know something about a particular technology, or I have a skill that they need on their team, or I just want to learn. I would say it's not the place to learn how to code, if that's what you're thinking, unless you want to sit there and watch a lot and not really have a lot of interaction at the level of say, an education kind of environment. You will learn a ton through observation. So it's at its core, it's a learning opportunity. And for me, the first year I participated in Space Apps Reno, I spent a lot of time learning about Unity game engine, which I had no prior knowledge of, and it's actually fantastic. Kind of kept that skill to this day. It's also to share. So as a person with an idea, we kind of do it in a startup weekend kind of way, where somebody will pitch, say, hey, I want to build a sphere that simulates the environment, and somebody else says, hey, that's really cool. I'll work on that with you. And then somebody else might say something that's not as compelling to the group. So you share your ideas, you share your knowledge, you share your experience with the other people on your team, and in the room and in general. So the boils down to what I call out of the box experience for the person, right? As opposed to thinking out of the box. You actually take yourself out of the box and do something completely different. Or you do the same thing you always do, and you have a really good time doing that because that's what you enjoy. So your box is good in that case. And the time constraints kind of present a different challenge to people, where you have to think, okay, what can I reasonably get done in an hour, or 4 hours, or 6, or 8, or even during the duration? And where if you're left to your own devices and you're in front of your own home computer writing code, you could go for 3 weeks, right, and then come up for air and go, oh, that was great. Well, with the hackathon, you don't really have the 3 weeks. So it kind of, you think about problems in either a larger or smaller context and kind of challenge yourself to think a different way, mainly because of that time constraint. If you're one of these people that writes real-time OS software, you're probably not too concerned, but yeah. And to fail, right? So one of the things that I learned was, we set a really ambitious goal, and halfway through we realized we're not going to get there. So in a way, it was kind of like a failure, but then no, it was just a reset, and then say, okay, what are our realistic expectations of completing the project that we set about to work on over that period of time. And it may be a case where you get to the end after the 24 hours or the 20 hours, and what you tried to produce just did not work. And that actually happened to one of the teams. I still think it was successful because the way the team paired up, it was somebody with a lot of experience and somebody that wasn't. And they produced something, but it wasn't the grand vision that they both had when they first started. So, I had to have like a conversation about this idea of failing, which is like the first time I've ever talked to anybody else about failure, right? Which was, for me, enlightening. And I kind of reset what they thought was happening, what they felt like was their, success bar for the event. That was a good thing. So, encouraging failure or just accepting failure and moving on. And obviously, if you start out with the intent to construct something, design a system, build some software, write an app, you would like to succeed, and that's part of the experience as well. And then there's like varying degrees of success. How much did you get done versus what you expected to get done, and what does that mean moving forward?
So I think this is kind of going back one slide, but we have a lot of people who are not programmers in the room. Mm-hmm. And what is the typical experience for them? Like, what are they working on? If they're a project manager or a designer or something like that.
Okay, so taking it to what I would consider kind of a fairly cross-functional team from last year. And it was basically what I would consider the person who had the idea, and that person is not was not a coder. She's more of a designer, more of a project manager, kind of leader individual. And she was able, and with her team, the way it worked out was that there was a guy that did mechanical work, and there was a guy that was really good at electrical, a couple of software people, and then another guy who just came in and like, hey, we need such and such. He was kind of like, he could do everything. So out of that team, there's 5 people on that team. One of them was actually what I consider a true programmer, does it for a living. The rest were, basically people that knew how to build things. And it was, there was another individual that assisted on the programming side, but was more there to basically kind of gain experience and also experience for the first time the hackathon, which she felt was a little bit imposing, and I had a conversation with her as well. Hopefully she'll be back this year. And so in that sense, it took a composition of there was a designer in there as well who kind of popped in for like an hour of work and did some UI work. So you look at that team and you say, 1.5 or 1.25 of the people were actually coders, or the rest of them were all interested in realizing the vision of this project, which involved a lot more electronics and power and motors and transforming, stepping things up and stepping things down to get things to happen. So, and that's actually kind of what happened the year before. It's kind of the same nexus. I think the first year, we had 8 programmers in the room, and we all coded for 2 days. So I'm glad it's kind of progressed from there. And I kind of actively, when I speak to people about the event, and when I speak to people about anything I'm attending, I kind of want to explore and reach out to other places other than pure technical disciplines, especially with coding.
Oh, I was just going to add, from my experience too, I've been at hackathons where we have writers who are producing content, we have videographers who are going out and interviewing people, designers that are doing graphics and that sort of thing. So, and then at the end, a lot of times who wins is based on who gives the best presentation. So having someone who can get up and speak in front of a crowd, whether they're technical or not, is one of the most helpful parts, and that is a huge part to play in any hackathon.
My watch is ringing, sorry. Go away. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so what is the outcome of this? So, and what I described earlier is your prototypical kind of engineer-based hackathon. You'd say, some people got in a room and they wrote a bunch of code, they explored it, built a new API, they did something. And then that may or may not lived on beyond the hackathon. And after a couple of years of doing my own hackathon and attending other hackathons in the past, over the past couple of decades in my career, I kind of thought to myself, what can we do to facilitate carrying the outcome beyond the weekend or whatever that is. I think the scenario I think of as the most is that innovation week that I mentioned at a Fortune 500 company. And we came up with a lot of ideas I thought were really interesting and novel ideas, and there were, I want to say 40 other teams throughout the company that did the same thing, and somebody bed them into a database, and we never heard from them again, which I think is why would you spend that time, right, as a company to do that and not do anything with the product, right? So for me, that's the worst case scenario, and then I started to think about, so what's a better way to improve that scenario? And so I'll cast the context of how I'm talking about the outcome in that sense. So the idea is that most people, knowledge is attained in a couple different ways. One way is by reading a book and ingesting information and kind of memorizing what it is you're reading and then maybe extrapolating from there. Another way is experiential, which is what hackathons are, right? It's the idea of going and either selecting a problem that's challenging and interesting to you to work on, or joining up with another group of people. And the experience that you'll have during a hackathon is kind of like ultimate focus, ultimate engagement for a really short period of time. And companies would pay their employees a lot of money if they could do that 40 hours a week, 52 weeks out of the year. But the reality is that you can sustain that for so long, and you can sustain it for longer periods of time if the thing you're working on is interesting and engages. So the idea of a hackathon is that you're getting a hands-on experience, and in this day and age, you also can reach out during the hackathon to other people experts that are available online, to, in the case of the Space Apps Hackathon, to other sites that are also working on the same challenge potentially, and then do some collaborative experience as well. So not just in the room, as we'd be here if we were in a hackathon, but also to be able to reach out. And what ends up happening is you build a relationship with the, and I think you'll attest to this, with the people that you're sitting across the table with, and conversing with for that brief period of time in your life and the scale of your life, and find common interests. And the common interests typically will center around the project, which is why the interests are so easy to coalesce on. And what I call is maybe a self-pivot. Maybe you're a really experienced JavaScript developer and you're working with somebody else who's a designer but knows a little bit of JavaScript, and then they say something to you that makes you realize, oh, I've kind of always framed that subject in this way, but based on what I just heard from this other individual, which you wouldn't have met without going through this experience, it just made me think about it slightly differently. You can turn the frame or adjust your focus or whatever, and think about that technology stack slightly differently, whatever that may be, right? Be engaged, right? So if you've ever worked on a team where it's meetings are minimal and work gets done, but when meetings happen, decisions are made, and then more work gets done. That's kind of like what hackathons are, right? It's not like people are kind of rowing the boat, like, okay, we have to go to this meeting every week. What do we say in it? And it's more like there's a purpose, there's intent to things that are done, and then engagement leads to a more enriching experience and learning whatever it is you're doing over that particular weekend. So how do we take that environment, right? That it's an environment where you're not afraid to fail, you're learning something new, you're working with different people. What's a way to kind of capture that and bring it to what I'm calling beyond the hackathon, right? And this starts with this sentence: what happens at the hackathon tends to stay in the hackathon, right? Well, we want to try to make that not happen, right? So I like to say the end is just the beginning. So if we can find a way to kind of extend the learning experience, right? So it's a tough ask, right? I've just got through a weekend, and somebody asked me to sit in a facility for 2 days and do some work. Do I want to do that every weekend? No. But maybe you do. I don't know. It's to each his own. But the majority of the population is going to go, yeah, that was awesome. It was kind of rough. I missed my family, but I really felt like I accomplished something. But so how do you take that and make that happen over the long run, and sustain that level of engagement? So one of the things that happens in hackathons today is typically a temporary space that's set up in somebody else's space, so you can never kind of go back and recreate that physical space. However, if there were places like that facilitated, like say a co-working space, or another example would be like the Innovation Center, which is actually run by the university, which makes it a little more convoluted to use than it should be. That's just my personal opinion. So the idea of setting up, or makerspace is another example. Although makerspaces tend to be more focused on the physical construction of things, as opposed to setting up a war room for people to go in and kind of just hack out ideas. And so let that hackathon space. So I haven't solved that one yet. I have a couple ideas on what that is, but then it's a question of time, money, and resources. And so the idea that I kind of came up with was like, say, there's a project that comes out of one of my hackathons. How do I go find the resources to make that live on? And that's something that I've been dealing with and kind of mapping out personally for the last year, thus the nonprofit and all that. And I think my ambitious goal is to get one of the things we did at Last Space Apps done by July of this year. And right now that's not going to happen, but I have a better idea of how it could happen and a more realistic idea of when it could happen. So that's, and I would take Garrett, because he's one of the people that worked on that project, and say, hey, I need you. And then I'd say, oh, by the way, we're going to set up this space and we're going to compensate you for your time. And there's going to be this other more, extension to it that's more interesting. So it becomes like part, I know he worked on it. He found it was interesting at the time. And if I can incentivize him properly, then he and his other team members might come back on and continue the work. So it's that part where this is kind of where I'm at right now. And I think that's all I'm going to say about it, because it's kind of all very formative in my mind. But I will say that I have been actively recruiting sponsors, because this project is going to cost tens of thousands of dollars, and I feel like that's kind of also turned the corner. So once that flips, then a lot of other things can get set in motion. So.
We actually had a couple of questions from the folks online. Dr. Jamie Orr, she asked 2 questions. What are some of the best techniques to recruit non-coders? And have you tried specifically marketing to other groups, since it's likely that the coders will show up regardless? Because there's free pizza and caffeine.
So non-coders, the way I've worked on recruiting non-coders is to talk to the non-coders who participated in previous events and say, who do you know? Let me talk to them and let me convince them that this is worth their while. And at the level that Space Apps Reno is at, it's really a kind of a grassroots kind of thing. And if I can share my passion and engage somebody else in it, then they're going to engage somebody else. I've kind of gone through, marketing this and social media that, but none of that stuff really works. You get attendees that way. You don't build like a longer relationship with somebody that's not one of your, considered your core demographic for a hackathon. And that's actually worked well. And was there another part to that question? Is that?
It was 2 similar questions, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the answer is that traditional marketing doesn't work.
I'm sorry, could you give me an example of what one of the challenges would be, so I can
will.
better frame it?
I will. Next 3 slides, we'll go right through that.
You can pay me after.
Okay. I got pizza in the back. So. All right. So another question, or is that both of those? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about what has gone on in Space Apps Reno, because I am the authoritative source for that information. All right, so as I mentioned, and I sitting in front of my computer on December 30th, 2012, and I said, hey, what's this Space Apps thing? And I go, well, there's a form here you fill out. And I just went in there and said, yeah, I've got a space. Yeah, I've run a hackathon before. Yeah, I did this other stuff for NASA. Let me in, right? And 2 weeks later, they said, hey, you're in. I was like, ooh, that worked. So the first year was what they called 9,000 plus attendees or participants in 75 cities. The original target was 50, and then they kept piling them on after the deadline, which was good. And I'm really not confident that 9,000 number is accurate, because their registration system, I personally registered 4 different times because it didn't work a couple times. So okay. So anyway, and I met the developer and I tried to help him, but that's, some developers do not want help. I learned that. All right, so as a team, there was 8 brave individuals, and we built this thing called the Open ROV Command Center. The challenge that year, one amongst many, was something called an Open ROV, which is an underwater rover that's open sourced hardware, and they needed a control system so they could control it remotely. And I think there was probably, I want to say 10 to 12 other sites that participated in their own way in this challenge. And our concept was to create a multi-tiered internet architecture and use Unity to drive a simulated OpenROV on your computer display. There's a video of this out there. I'm not going to show you that one today because it's really long. But, you know, so we built, you know, essentially 3 moving parts, a game in Unity that pulled in a 3D model of this OpenROV from their STL files and rendered it, simulated ocean and water and fluid dynamics, and we used a Elite Motion Controller, which is basically like a Kinect for your computer, so we could guide the thing in the water, and then that talked to a Node.js server, which then transferred that to a web service, which then, in theory, talked to a service that connected to the actual OpenROV, and then told it, you know, go up, down, left, right kind of thing, and controlled the various motors and the buoyancy characteristics. We never actually made it to a live connection to the actual OpenROV that was in a pool, I believe in Berkeley. That might not be right. And we tried, but it wasn't going to happen in that period of time. So that was kind of like one of those scale and scope things. In 2014, you see how the number went down. I think it's a better, more accurate count in 2014. 8,200 people. So those numbers are like, you know, huge for hackathons, right? Hackathons typically maybe, you know, 250, 300 people kind of thing. And the fact that it's globally coordinated across, in this case, 95 cities, and then they started project counts, right? So 671 projects created by, you know, 8,200 people in places that some you probably never heard of. You know, the U.S. I think makes up maybe like 20 or 25 of those cities at the most. And we built this. There was a couple other projects. This is the one that was the most interesting. It's a game called Fallout, and I'll show you the video in a little bit. But basically, the idea is that you have a device that you can wear on your wrist that's a communication device that allows you to be tracked while you're out in the wasteland killing things and claiming other people's stuff by central command, and they can monitor your health and tell you when to come back and all kinds of things. So it's a construct from a video game, and we got a lot of really good press out of that because we put together, you know, the team put together a really good promo video to get submitted to the NASA judging, but it kind of took a life of its own. And the company Bethesda released a new version of Fallout last fall, and they went and manufactured 2,000 of these things on their own. The beauty of that particular challenge was that they 3D printed the whole thing over the weekend and built software, and you'll see in the video integrated all kinds of fun stuff like, hey, I've got a Geiger counter. No, I know a guy who's got a Geiger counter. You want me to bring it in? Because that's one of the things in the game is radioactivity, right? Like, yeah, we didn't know that when we started this, but yeah, bring it in, right, kind of thing. So, and so last year, 14,000. So we've seen a case where NASA didn't want to be involved with it at all. They like outsourced some team, and then they kind of said, oh, well, this is kind of cool. And then between 2014 and 2015, they came up with this whole Open NASA. And then in 2015, they just went crazy and open sourced everything that they could. And now they actually put their name on their logo, the event. Before that, they just called it International as opposed to NASA's Space Apps Challenge. So they made a real push last year and this year to get the word out that, hey, NASA's behind this. It's good for them because it really gets them a lot of mind share, a lot of people thinking about what they're thinking about, and you can kind of see that numbers have gone up. So last year, 2 projects, GEO, which we'll see a video on, and BLSS. So BLSS is the full name of that is Biggest Little Solar System, which I've transmorgified into something called Solar System in Your City, which is the other thing I'm trying to build, right? Which is creating scale models on any scale of the solar system from a sheet of paper to the city of Reno or Truckee or whatever, right? So there's a lot happening with that kind of behind the scenes right now, and that's your project. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that was like?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I worked on the BLSS project last year. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time. And it really consisted of two components. The first off, there was a back-end component, a server-side component. A couple of guys worked on that, and they built a system that calculates the position and orbit of any of the major solar bodies in, any of the bodies in the solar system. So all the planets, the large asteroids, the moons, that sort of thing. And this is actually, believe it or not, this was something that NASA didn't have public, and we couldn't find anywhere on the internet. Like, how do you calculate what the current positions of the planets are? Like, it just didn't, from what we found, we couldn't find a place where that existed. And then I built the front end, and the concept was that we got originally was the director of the planetarium said, hey, at the center of the planetarium is a scale model of the sun. If we scale the solar system to be the size of that sun, then the entire solar system overlays the city of Reno pretty closely. Like Neptune was like on the edge, Pluto was like out in Fallon somewhere, most of the solar system fit pretty comfortably within the city of Reno. And at that scale, I think Jupiter was around
It's a meter.
a meter, yeah. And then, but Earth was, I think it was 2.5 inches or something like that, which that's amazing. Like, we're talking about the sun was, I think, 9.8 meters in radius, and the Earth is this big. So you have a sun that's close to 60 feet wide, but the Earth is that big. Like, that was just like mind-blowing to me. And so I helped work on the UI for that, and it was a great project. And our goal is to eventually, was to be able to hand it back to the planetarium so that they could use it as an educational tool for their visitors. Sorry.
Did you work with the planetarium beforehand, or did they talk to you afterwards, after you got started?
So we had gotten the idea from the director of the planetarium, but we got some feedback throughout the process, but they did not help with any of the development or anything. It was more from an idea and kind of checking process. I'm sorry, I thought you were.
I was just going to say that the Museum of Science in Boston has an installation across Boston of cast versions of scale planets, and it's the solar system across Boston as well. So I know they've done that.
All right, then the other project, Geo, which we'll actually watch a video on, because it's actually more compelling to see the video than me to try and explain it.
Was the underwater remote vehicle guidance system wired or wireless?
So at the time, it was tethered by Ethernet. And they've come out with a second iteration of that architecture and that model that's wireless. And I haven't looked into that one in detail. So the answer is it's evolved over time. The one we were dealing with had Ethernet cable and a power cable, and it went out and did its thing and was tethered the whole time. And then I think one of the reasons they did that is because they wouldn't be able to pull it back because they didn't know what was going to happen. But yeah, so if you go to openrov.org, I think you'll see the latest thing. We had talked about spending about $3,000 of whose money, I don't know, to go buy one and put it in Tahoe. So that kind of like is where I'm at today. It's like, okay, I want to do this stuff. We'll figure out how to make some money, raise some money, and make it happen. So, yeah. Oh, is it .com? Oh, you've got, yeah, nice. Go ahead. So,
Let me ask I have a real quick one. So if you got the challenge a month before, sounds like you actually did some research before you started coding? Before the coding weekend? Or how did that work? I'm just kind of confused.
So this last year and this year, what we've done is we called a preview night, which allows people to come together, look at the challenges, pick one, and then start talking amongst themselves after that. This year it's a week before. Last year I think it was maybe 10 days before. And that's worked out pretty well. And basically what happens the day of the challenge, we start at 10 o'clock, everybody shows up and kind of mingles around. We give them an hour to kind of sort themselves out. If somebody has something to present that wasn't shown at the preview night, then they talk and try to recruit people. and if not, everybody kind of coalesces around what's there, and then at like around 11, everybody starts working. So.
And typically that is the kind of the normal thing with hackathons, is that you do some planning ahead of time, but generally they don't like you to work on things in advance. Like other hackathons that I've been a part of, Startup Weekend asks that you don't do anything significant. So that's a general sort of thing, is that you try and do all of the major work within, but maybe some planning and some idea work happens in advance.
Yeah, so real quick on that. So NASA doesn't have any stipulation on that. The reason that people didn't know about what to work on is because they just didn't publish it. The other thing is they give everybody the room to do basically what they want. And so in the case of last year, both these projects were created locally, and they fit within a category, which makes them eligible for, like the NASA level competition. And so they weren't even actually proposed by NASA. People came up with them on their own. And so, that's the flexibility that you may not have at some things that you go to. Go ahead.
All right, so my question, I've done the Startup Weekend as well with Ellen and Garrett and a bunch of people, and we walked in there, everyone pitched an idea, and then the teams would develop around the idea.
Yeah.
It sounds like the thing with OpenRV, that you guys all went in there, OpenRV said, hey, we're going to do a hackathon, and we want you to go and develop all this for us. They obviously got good out of it. Did all you guys get was just the free food and drink and the challenge?
Yeah.
So any company could say, hey, I want to throw a hackathon for the price of pizza, and that's beautiful.
See? Yeah.
There was actually one at Squaw Valley that was last fall, I think, that was exactly that. Just a company said, come and build stuff on our system, and
Yeah.
we'll take your ideas and sell them.
Right, AT&T. Exactly.
Yeah, there was prize. There was money at that. They gave away, I think, 10 grand or something like that. It was a good prize.
So yeah, I do try to give away something. So I typically beg, borrow, and steal stuff from any startup or established company that says, yeah, we'll send you 2 of those. And my one mainstay is Pebble Technology, the company that makes the Pebble smartwatch. They give me stuff every year, and they just sent me a box today. So I love those guys.
I won one last year, and I forgot to wear it tonight.
That's all right. I switched to an Apple Watch. If they knew that, they'd probably be upset. Anyway, let's take a look at 2 of the. Let's see if it actually plays. Yeah, that's the monster. There we go.
Pipboy 3000, part of your life.
For the Space Apps Challenge, we decided to make a real-life Pipboy from the popular game Fallout. We have real-time mapping and the ability to see a heads-up sensor display. That data is then transmitted directly to a web HQ in real time so that someone can view that data. We're using a Texas Instruments BLE sensor tag, a homemade Geiger counter, and sending data to the device using a Pinocchio microcontroller.
Which talks to the server, and also there's a number of places in this 3D printed chassis where there's like a heart rate monitor, blood pressure, temperature kind of stuff. And they have a 3D printer at the Del Mar library on UNR, and that thing was I think it probably ran for about 18 hours printing all these parts. So, and
for this year's Space Apps Challenge, we wanted to create a device that would aid astronauts when they're far from Earth. So we came up with the GEO, the Geological Environment Observer. The GEO is a device that emulates weather patterns of Earth. The purpose is to help ease the depression and anxiety astronauts may experience when living on a habitat somewhere in space. The GEO uses an Intel Edison to turn live data into simulated weather from the city of the astronaut's choosing. Currently, we're able to demonstrate lighting, sound, and water effects to represent day and night, clouds, rain, lightning, wind, and sunlight. We also included a plant for some greenery. Further considerations for this project included gray water filtration system, given the limited resources available to astronauts. The receptacle of the GEO will be made more compact and easily transportable. We also plan to integrate more weather effects. Ultimately, GEO is an all-encompassing Earth experience so that astronauts can always be connected in some way to home.
So I think probably people online could probably hear better than the folks in the room. So if you could just give a quick...
yeah, let me get a picture of it up here now.
Cool.
All right, so the idea here is that you have an environment that you can take with you. And what they built was a fish bowl and 2 steel pots with some power in the bottom and some wireless electronics in the top. And inside is water, some plant-looking material, a way to pump water to the top, an LED light ring, and all of that is controlled by some software that was running in essentially a web browser through a piece of electronics from Intel called the Edison. And they did this in like 18 hours. It's pretty amazing accomplishment. And they went through several iterations of what was on the top and what was on the bottom and what fit. And there's some boxes of power supplies you can't see off to the side, so they could get this all to work. And the concept is that if you're a space traveler, you could take this kind of representation of a real environment as opposed to what's in the spaceship, and then find out what the weather's like, in Miami, Florida, and make it, the ambient light match that. If it's raining, have a rainfall, fog, so on and so forth. And so it's a very awesome project. I believe that this is one of those where there are others in the other people that are also interested in this tech. And there was a company, or not a company, but an organization out of Japan that actually built one for, I think, either Kickstarter or Indiegogo called Temposphere, which is kind of like a manifestation of this same concept, but in their own little way. So that was a team that just sat down. Somebody said, I have this idea, and a bunch of people said, go for it. So, all right, so I like this quote because, well, it may not be an absolute truth. We all know that experiential knowledge is also as important as academic or just other ways to learn things. So here's my pitch. No, so our event's in less than 2 weeks. On the 16th, we're having our preview night, and I don't know what happens next. Nothing. I think we're done. Yeah. So, well, there it is. Boom. Yeah. So, these guys, you talk about, giving some people some pizza and whatever, and they just show up. I basically try to run this really lean in terms of the financial side of things. And if anybody wants to sponsor, I have plenty of ways to do that. It doesn't have to be money. It could be time, or buy a dinner for somebody, things like that. So,
and just to clarify for everyone, the 16th is the planning meeting for the event, and April 23rd and 24th is the actual Space Apps Challenge, and also the Microsoft Hackathon.
Yeah, okay, so I have to say something about that. So the way Microsoft Hackathon works, just if you're thinking about attending or somebody that might, is they run 24 hours from noon on Saturday and noon on Sunday. And we obviously have a crossover period, and we're going to allow the creators of things to commingle and enter one or the other. I don't know what the Microsoft guys are going to look like at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, but that's their problem. And so we're going to have shared prizes and whatnot. So it should be kind of an interesting time. They'll bring in their own little, they have evangelists coming in, and they have their technology stacks and so on and so forth.
Does anyone have any questions? I'll pass the mic around if you do.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm not technical, but founded a somewhat technical nonprofit that's trying to leverage technology. Mm-hmm. And we're participating in, it's called the Chai for Good event in Silicon Valley, and they have a day of service, which is kind of like a hackathon for social good projects, nonprofits. Mm-hmm. So I'm the non-technical person coming in with a project and hoping to leverage the expertise of people who are coming from like Google, Facebook, you name it, Microsoft, and lending their time for only an 8-hour period to help. So my question is, what would be the best way as a non-technical person to be able to get the most out of folks that have completely different skill sets, but I'm the one coming with the vision and the project, but not knowing their language and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. The way I would look at it is, you yourself would want to be focused about what you think you would like to achieve with these individuals. Kind of generally knowing what their skill set is. And so if you have like, you know, kind of a broad definition of it is what you want, focus it down into, you know, 3 or 4 different things, because you don't know which one is going to catch, right? And that's the thing. If you come in just one idea and there's 10 people, you might get one person. But if you have kind of like, you know, a couple things going and maybe they're kind of, you know, offshoots of each other or variations, then you might get a little more traction. To a technical person, it really depends. If they're like purely technical, then if you don't speak on their terms, they're just going to make a judgment and say, yeah, I like you, I'll work with you, or they're just, you know, going to move on. If they're kind of a little more on the other end of the scale and more receptive to conversation, then you just engage them and go. And you'll feel, at that point, it's just like any other tech team. If the personalities are strong on the team and they work together well, then the team is highly functional. If there's one personality that's, or, you know, kind of odd and kind of sets everybody else and wear strange directions, that team will just flounder. And so that's kind of what you're looking for. It's not even, I mean, technical aptitude is obviously key to achieving some purpose if you don't have that knowledge, but in order to develop that kind of synergy, it's more about just personality and presentation and you know, kind of explaining what I would say is that idea of what's the purpose of the intent and what engages that person.
So hackathons, for me personally, hackathons have been pretty critical to my career. I think the first hackathon that I ever entered, I ended up winning. I built a billing application for consultants, basic freelancers, and that just kind of kicked off the consulting. People companies called and people wanted to hire me to do work. So there's the exposure aspect, I think, to it. And then the second hackathon that was meaningful, and I've done a lot that we didn't finish. You know, we just didn't finish, or the team didn't work, or, you know, we just, you know, kind of didn't make the goal. But the second one, it's an application that's still running, and you can go look at it. It's called electriccheckbook.com. And it was basically a shared ledger. And when we were first starting New Leaders, my partner was 500 miles away in Santa Barbara, and I was up here in Truckee, and we needed a way to share ledgers before QuickBooks Online and any of those things. So we basically built a simple single-entry accounting system that allowed us to kind of keep track of expenses and things. And you can see it. You can go sign on for it. It's free. We keep it running just kind of as like a trophy or whatever. Cool. So it's still up there, it's still running, and it's exactly the way we finished it, except I've updated and patched security patches and like minimal like requirements to keep it running over time. And there's about 5,000 people using it now every day, so it's good. They can have a big impact on a company.
Absolutely.
We have one question online. Can you talk briefly about like civic hackathons and how hackathons can be specifically directed at helping the community or the local government?
So I've seen this go in Reno kind of an interesting way. So in the case of Hack for Reno, it started as kind of let's have a hackathon. The city of Reno has a bunch of data. Let's see what we can do with it. And that was kind of the first year. And that was actually fairly successful in terms of the developer response and the satisfaction level. And then the second time they did it, it involved some sponsors who had expectations about getting something done over the weekend. And it didn't happen. So there was some grumbling about, oh, we didn't get our app, you know. And so typically, I think for that to work, you need somebody that's in the city that understands how the city works or how the community, you know, would want to draw in terms of healthcare or something like that, draw from their internal resources to support this outside activity. And really that hasn't happened. So I think that's one of the key aspects is whatever the sponsoring entity is, whether it be a municipality or a larger community, say like Truckee Meadows Water Authority or whatever, they have to have an SME or somebody that's willing to devote time to make that happen. And then The other part of it is you're not going to get, over a weekend, you might get something like if you get your checkbook thing going, might be great. You might write, say for the city, something that dumps out police crime stats, right? And those are kind of novel, little interesting things, but taking it beyond that requires then an engagement by that same organization that's interested in having their technology or their data exploited by outside sources, maintaining that and sustaining that over time. And that's the other part, is it's typically kind of like, hey, we'll run in here, we're doing this hackathon for the community, a couple days, great, some stuff's given away and prizes are given, and then everybody kind of disappears. It takes, I think, I mentioned as part from the sponsoring organization, it also takes somebody from the tech community to drive that from that end and keep people engaged. So.
All right, well, thank you for joining us tonight. I think this is a pretty important topic. I'm really excited to be doing the NASA Space Apps Challenge this year, and hopefully we'll continue to push for some hackathons and more engagement up in the Truckee Tahoe area. Thanks again, Joe, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.